Good afternoon, everybody. It is Sunday in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. My name is Adam Bittner, assistant sports editor for multimedia at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, joined for our Steelers-Ravens post-game show by Post-Gazette sports columnist Joe Starkey. And after an 18-16 Steelers victory at Acrisure Stadium, hard-fought, classic, back and forth between these two teams. Steelers kind of survived in this game. I think they had a lot of adversity that they faced. But they still came out ahead of the Ravens, forced them into more mistakes than they committed. So, Joe, what's your top line reaction here before we start getting into the nuts and bolts?
And this is what I'm going to write for the Post-Gazette, is that the Ravens and John Harbaugh and Lamar Jackson have a Steeler problem. That's 8 of 9, and that's Lamar, again, being almost completely stifled. And, because he's great, he made some plays late in the game. He's just not himself against this team. Completes less than half his passes. Doesn't really look dynamic for long portions of the game. Started horribly. Whatever they're doing to Lamar Jackson should be studied by every single team in football. And I realize not everybody has TJ Watt, things like that. But nevertheless, the Steelers, they really, at this point, I wasn't buying it necessarily going into the game. I am now. They're in Lamar's head, and they just own the Ravens right now. 8 out of 9. I don't think you'll find that in this series since Tomlin and Harbaugh became coaches. 2008 for Harbaugh. I think they were 7-3 in one stretch against the Steelers, but 8 out of 9. And Lamar, honestly, even though he made some spectacular plays, he's just another guy against the Steelers.
Yeah, he is. The final stats were 16 of 33 for 207 yards, Joe. But I think before that, it was like 130 yards on 13 of whatever it was going into those last couple of drives where he was really just cutting it loose. So they had almost completely, taken him out of the game in ways. I did think at times, Joe, and we'll get into this after we introduce the show, but it seemed like he passed on some obvious running situations today and looked for throws and maybe didn't make some plays that he otherwise would have. Excited to get into all of that. Before we do, just want to thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. There's no better place to get new windows and doors installed in your home than Pella, who can help you save on energy costs year-round. Schedule a free in-home consultation with your local Pella Windows and Doors to find the right product for your home and budget. Give them a call at 866-593-1560 to discuss your project further. That's 866-593-1560 to get started planning on your new windows and doors installation with Pella Windows and Doors of Pittsburgh. Joe, let's keep pulling at that thread a little bit, and just the way that he played today. Were you surprised that he wasn't more involved with his legs? I think the final stats, 4 carries for 46 yards. I think 2 of those came on a couple big, option plays where he kind of pulled and fooled the Steelers defense, but he wasn't scrambling a whole lot and getting away from pressure. And when the Steelers kind of overrushed him, he really didn't make them pay for it, in my estimation.
Yeah, I think I see it differently. I think I see a certain rush that Chris Hoke calls the mush rush, where even if it looks like he has lanes, I think there were a couple times I would agree with you, a couple times. But most of the time, man, you heard who was doing the game with Iron Eagle? Charles Davis?
Yes.
Talking about the Jordan rules. That's what the Steelers have. They play this guy a certain way, and nobody else does. And when it looks like he has room to run, he really doesn't. Maybe he's fooled. Maybe he's seeing ghosts against this team. But you notice outside the pocket, which is where he does a lot of his damage, he never really got outside the pocket to throw. And when he did, he looked horrible. Just looked horrible. That 2-point play, I think, was emblematic of Lamar's career against the Steelers. Just like, what are you doing? He has no options in the end zone. He's just running around. Usually he can make plays against people. Against this team, he can't. I heard Mike Tomlin talking about it before the game, that the one thing we cannot let him do, and we don't let him do, is get outside the pocket, because he's almost a perfect passer outside the pocket, and he does a lot of his running damage there. So, yeah, maybe a couple times he could have taken off, but, man, they go to great lengths to make sure that doesn't happen with the Jackson rules, I guess we'll call them, because they're unbelievable. And I really mean that, Adam, that every team in the NFL should study what Mike Tomlin and the Steelers do against Lamar, because it's It's brilliant football.
Well, you mentioned at the top having TJ Watt makes that easier, but it was not just about TJ Watt today. You had guys making, significant plays all day, and even in situations where I don't think you were necessarily looking for it. Thinking to that Patrick Queen forced fumble before the half. Obviously, Peyton Wilson makes that huge play that they called interception. I think that was more of a strip fumble situation, but whatever you call it, Joe, there were guys making plays for this defense today, so it wasn't just a matter of TJ Watt dominating Lamar Jackson. It was the whole unit playing well.
Man, I'll say Patrick Queen had a great game against his former team. Most notably when he rips the ball out and recovers it. Had some big hits. Joey Porter Jr., I thought maybe had his best game as a Steeler. I thought he was great right up until the final play he makes, basically the winning play in a lot of ways, where he tackles Lamar out of bounds. Even lesser lights like Dean Lowry had a lot of plays in the game. And another thing, by the way, they do against Lamar is tip a lot of passes because they keep him in the pocket. You're not going to get tip passes if he's running out to his right and setting up. Man, they keep him in there. And he's a smart guy, and he's a great player. If he had avenues to escape and thought he could run, I think he would. I think they have him totally off balance, and they have his whole offense off balance, including his offensive line. How many ineligible receiver down or lineman downfield penalties did we see? They're not themselves, man. They're 30 since this streak began, 8 of 9. Let me make sure I have this number correct, Adam, so I don't get it wrong here. The Ravens are 37-18 against everybody else, and 1-8 against the Steelers. 37-18 and 1-8. So yeah, like I started out with today, Harbaugh and Lamar have a Steeler problem.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be the rematch in Baltimore is going to be very interesting because last year obviously that game didn't matter, Joe. The Ravens had the number 1 seed clinched. Now I think no matter what, there's going to be some level of significance on it. They're not going to be running away with I think either the division or the AFC itself this season. So looking forward to seeing that. Also, before we're still talking about the defense, wanted to mention Nick Herbig coming back and forcing that fumble early. That was huge as well, and I don't think it's going to stop the cult following. I've always said I think their most valuable is 3 pass rushers: TJ Watt, Alex Highsmith, and Nick Herbig. I think they all do different things very well, complement each other very well. But I know there's a contingent of people who love Nick Herbig and want him on the field more than Alex Highsmith. And if he keeps making plays like this, it's going to be hard to keep him off the field, isn't it, Joe?
Yeah, man. He that play he made was huge early in the game. And to have that kind of depth, they haven't had it in a few years. You mentioned the overall landscape of the AFC North. Just to switch topics very abruptly here, Adam. I'm watching this Buffalo game. Listen, man, if the Bills win this game in Buffalo against Kansas City and the Steelers can bounce back and beat Cleveland here, quick turnaround, then they get a nice rest. They're only a game out. That Christmas Day game here could be for number 1 seed in the AFC. The Bills just scored, by the way. That could be for the number 1 seed. Can you imagine all the games at home here?
Well, I hope we can see it, though, Joe, because I don't know if you paid attention to that Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson fight the other night, but I could barely get Netflix to work. It didn't work live, so I really hope they straighten that out. But you're right. That game could be really important.
Very good point. I don't want to talk about that fight. This fight was way better today. And, man, I
think we lost Joe there for a second. Just run down some stats while hopefully we get him reconnected. You back, Joe?
I hope so. Yes, I apologize for that.
Oh, no worries. Hopefully they can get their technology to work, and that'll be an important game and an exciting Christmas Day treat. Joe, let's talk a little bit about the offense. Get into I guess Russell Wilson's day. I didn't think he handled the pressure super well, especially in the first half. But if you look down the stat sheet at the end, finished 23 of 36, made some big plays. It wasn't pretty, but I think he adjusted in a way that Lamar Jackson did not today.
He did what in a way Jackson did not?
Adjusted.
He was okay. That pass in the end zone was a disaster. That was a disastrous play. I thought Russ was pretty good otherwise. Going against a defense that honestly is way better than its numbers. I didn't think Tomlin was blowing smoke this week when he said the Ravens, when I watch them, aren't as bad as some of their numbers. I don't think they are either. To be real honest, they're very stout up front. They have 2 stars in Roquan Smith and Kyle Hamilton. They're still going to be heard from. Make no mistake, the Ravens are. But as far as Russ goes, yeah, he made some plays. I thought the deployment of Justin Fields was very well timed, brilliant even. Mount Washington's got to jump for that ball in the end zone, but come on. And not only did I think that was horrible, when they had the ball again and he threw it up for Pickens when you're up, what was it, 15-10 at the time? What are you doing? Did anybody tell you have Boswell on your team? That ball almost got picked off. At that point in the game, kick the field goal, go up 8, which they wound up doing because a near pick didn't happen in the end zone. There's a time and a place for jump balls. Those weren't the times or the places. Those were the times and places to have Boswell win the game for you. And by the way, what a story he is. And Justin Tucker is a disaster. And honestly, we could sit here and analyze the game for 10 days, and I'm sure we will. But the battle of the kickers is what decided it. One guy stinks, and one guy's staking a claim as maybe the greatest kicker ever.
Yeah, he was incredible. And just the way he allows the Steelers to play, and just the way Mike Tomlin, I think on the broadcast, Ian Eagle was saying, oh, the Steelers are punting. And then he realized, no, they're bringing out Boswell here for a 57-yard field goal. I think you saw that the Steelers don't have to take ridiculous chances. And I think that's what made the Russell Wilson interception, particularly rough is that, yeah, you have those 3 points in your pocket probably. And it was a shame too, because he made such a vintage play to get out of that rush, Joe.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh man, he's going to make a play here. This is going to be some vintage Russ. And then you see that it was disappointing, but still bounced back okay from there. Joey, I did want to ask you about the Justin Fields package. We finally saw it in a couple different instances today. I think it worked fairly well. I think the big question coming out of this game, obviously you only get 9 points on, how many red zone trips they had today. Do you want to see more of Justin Fields in the red zone and just the different look he gives defenses?
Not really in the red zone. I thought they deployed him fine. I think, Russ was great in the red zone last year. And I think that it'll be fine in the red zone moving forward. I think if Mount Washington jumps up and tips that ball, it was a horrible decision. Don't get me wrong. But I think Russ will be fine in the red zone. I do. Do you want to see more of Fields there?
I don't want to see him as like the permanent quarterback, Joe, but I think situationally, I think they could find some ways to use him. And I think you saw the Ravens didn't quite know how to react to him. He should have made that game-winning play where he got called a yard short. Oh, he was down a yard short, not just called a yard short. But I think they didn't know who was going to get the ball there. And in those situations, I think that's valuable. I think sometimes with Russell Wilson, it's a little easier to read. It's a little more predictable. So I think if you have a weapon like Justin Fields, don't do it every time. Don't do it all the time, but find, some moments for him that make sense. I'd like to see a little bit more of that moving forward. But no, I don't want him to be necessarily like the red zone quarterback. I don't think that serves anybody either. Joe, also wanted to talk about the offensive line today. I think brutally inconsistent at times. There's times you look at them and say, man, I'm seeing it come together. And then you see Broderick Jones take 2 holding penalties. He seems to be involved in every single scrap that ever involves the Steelers anymore, Joe. What's your read on him individually in this group as a whole?
I mean, obviously he struggled this year, right? And the group as a whole, I think they were playing a better defense than people give them credit for. I really do. And you're going to have that in this matchup. You're going to have some struggles for sure. And I also think that Dan Moore got beat for a sack today. There was some tough sledding, but also I thought they ran the ball decently. I thought they ran it decently. And overall, I think this is a unit that needs to grow together still, but I thought they were passable. They're passable right now. I think Broderick Jones needs to get a lot better, though.
Yeah, and I think more disciplined is kind of number one. It's one thing to give up a sack. I think it's one thing to give up some pressures. Those are things you can grow from, but you can clean up the penalties immediately and not. He just seems like I'm just waiting for him to take a devastatingly stupid penalty getting in one of these scraps, Joe. I don't see why he has to be involved in every single one. Yeah, you got to stick up for your guys, but the other 10 guys on that offense are not as consistently involved in this stuff as he is.
I know when there was a penalty earlier this season that he could have gotten for piling on late. Don't get me wrong. I like his fire. I think at times that's been questioned. And at least nobody can argue that he's very much into this right now. So I actually do like that part of it. But clearly some work needs to be done with Broderick. There's no doubt about that. But again, I thought they were going up. Don't forget this Buffalo team I'm watching right now, that the Ravens absolutely stifled Josh Allen. Their defense did. So that's not an easy defense to go against, contrary maybe to popular belief. And I know they've struggled a little bit against the pass, but I think by the end of this season, you're going to see a pretty darn good Ravens defense.
Well, it's not just against the pass, Joe. It's against Joe Burrow and Jamar Chase. I mean, those guys are two of the best out there right now, and the Ravens, their numbers are definitely skewed by having already played both of their games against them and struggling specifically against that duo.
Real good point. Yeah, not only that, they've already played Burrow twice. They've played Mahomes. They played Josh Allen. They played a Baker Mayfield. They played a bunch of high volume type of quarterbacks. I think their numbers were deceiving coming into this game. I really do. Now they got a problem with Roquan, though. If he's injured, he's unbelievable. But the real story to me, too, was the Steeler defense. I can't get over how great, really, they were today. I know they allowed the final drive, but who cares? They made the play on the 2-point conversion, and you're going against what came into this game as the most prolific offense in terms of yards per play in the history of the league, with a guy that was on pace to have the highest passer rating in the history of the league. I would have run it a lot more if I was the Ravens with Derrick Henry, but one of their problems was that they were highly penalized, so they kept, starting from behind the chains a lot, but I would have run it more if I were them.
Yeah, they were having some success. Joe, just back to the offense for a minute. A rough day for receivers not named George Pickens. We've spent so much time talking about this topic. I think there was a pervasive feeling of after Mike Williams catches that touchdown in Washington that, hey, maybe this group is figuring things out a little bit. We don't see Mike Williams at all today. Van Jefferson had that huge drop, has no catches on one target. Calvin Austin, one catch for -1 yards on his 2 targets. We mentioned that this Ravens defense was better than their numbers said, but those guys got to show up more than that, don't they, Joe?
Yeah, for sure. I thought we'd see more of Mike Williams, didn't you?
Yeah.
I mean,
not like a ton, but I thought they'd find some spots for him like they did last week.
I think what they wanted was to be multiple. In other words, have tight ends on the field that could either block for you or in Mount Washington's case, go out and catch the ball. And I actually thought he made some nice plays today. In fact, after he didn't jump for the ball in the end zone, he made a nice, was it a 3rd down catch? I think it was a really nice catch. But yeah, that's been an issue. And unless Mike Williams steps up and really contributes more than anybody maybe thinks he will, that's going to continue to be an issue against better teams, especially.
Yeah, and I think that was reflected by the team that you played today. You did mention the tight ends as well. Darnell Washington has been getting more and more looks, Joe. I mean, are we getting to the point where maybe between those 2 tight ends, when we talk about getting the tight ends more involved, that it's more of a 50-50 proposition than it was last season when it was more of just Darnell Washington's a blocker, Pat Freiermuth's in here to catch passes. It really feels like they are both threats for opposing defenses right now.
Yeah, Russell's unlocked that. He loves to throw to the tight end, and I think that's big. And, in another situation, I'm all for giving Mount Washington a jump ball. Of course, a jump ball implies that the guy will actually jump for the ball, which he didn't do. But I love the fact that Russell is looking for him. I think he's a weapon. I do. I think Mount Washington's a weapon. And, yeah, 2 tight ends is great because, again, when you have both on the field together, you become very versatile and multiple. And teams have to guess, and they have to be wary that you might not just be run blocking on a play. And in Mount Washington's case, he gets down the field a little bit. Surprisingly, he gets behind people. So I'm encouraged by that facet of their offense. It was a tough day overall. There's no doubt it was a tough day, but they did what needed to get done offensively. And as I've said a number of times here, I think that the Ravens defense, ask Josh Allen, they're way better than what their numbers were, I think.
Yeah, but I don't think any of us have blinkered expectations for the receivers either, Joe. I think if you get a play or two like you got from Darnell Washington today, get one from Calvin Austin, get one from Van Jefferson, suddenly things start to look a lot differently. So, it doesn't have to be like a 10-catch effort from any of these guys. Just make the plays that are there to be made, like Calvin Austin did on that first driver. Van Jefferson did down near the goal line. A few more minutes with Joe before we get him out of here on Deadline to Write. Want to thank a couple more sponsors. The game is always on at Archie's on Carson, Pittsburgh's best place for food, drinks, and sports. Open Sundays for the game, 12 p.m. to 2 a.m. Be sure to check out their daily drink specials and stop in for 80-cent wing nights Monday through Thursday. Tell them Paul Zeiss sent you. We'll have Paul Zeiss here next week on the post-game show. And remember, he does his daily show now on Post-Gazette Sports Now YouTube channel, 5 p.m. roughly. So make sure you're subscribed for that. Also want to thank Goldberg, Persky, and White. If you were diagnosed with mesothelioma or lung cancer, call your local attorneys at Goldberg, Persky, and White. For over 40 years, their firm has represented thousands of lung cancer and mesothelioma victims. Call 1-800-COMPLEX or visit gpwlaw.com for a free consultation. Jaylen Warren was able to play in this game. It's now a couple times he's been fairly healthy, and the Steelers have been able to use those two running backs like they did for much of last season. He ends up being more efficient than Najee Harris, 41 yards on 9 carries, but Najee gets 63 on 18. How do you feel about having that duo again and how it played out in this game today?
Great. And I wonder how it would have turned out if Warren wasn't able to play like it looked like he might not be able to. 9 carries for 41 yards. Man, his first carry of the game, I think it was Marlon Humphrey. Maybe it was somebody else that he just absolutely railroaded. Made some big first downs. He's a nice outlet guy to throw to on third down. You have to have both. And I thought both ran incredibly hard today. Incredibly hard. I love watching those guys run. I'm still sitting here looking at the numbers right now, Adam. I just can't believe that Derrick Henry leaves the ballpark with only 13 carries. What are you doing? What are you doing? The game was close the whole way. 13 carries for that guy? Crazy. The Steelers ran it 34 times. The Ravens ran it 19, especially there was a point where Lamar was getting hit on every play. And like I said, they were in a lot of long down and distance. So to a certain extent, I get it, but maybe they don't get in those down and distance if they just give it to him more, like twice in a row. Did they ever give it to him twice in a row? I just don't know what they were doing with Todd Monken and Harbaugh, what the game plan was here, because it didn't look like much of one.
Yeah, it was not a particularly negative game script until those last couple of drives, Joe, to your point. I also wanted to ask you about Minkah Fitzpatrick here before we get out. Obviously, he's become a growing point of emphasis in the discourse because he's not forced the turnovers. But we know that Lamar Jackson is lethal in the middle of the field, and that's kind of where Minkah Fitzpatrick does his best work. After this game, where do you weigh in on the value of Minkah Fitzpatrick and what he brings to this defense if he's not forcing turnovers?
I think if Minkah had played a bad game today, it would have been impossible not to notice that. I think when these guys sit down and watch tape, like you said, I bet you he played a really good positional game, and I bet you that Lamar stayed away from him. And by the way, I believe he led the team in solo tackles, including 2 that I thought may have saved touchdowns. So to me, I have no complaints about anybody on that defense after they held the Ravens to 16 points. That's half their average, basically.
Yeah, I think it was a pretty heroic effort by that group today. Joe, any final thoughts, especially as we look, down? We mentioned a little bit earlier in the show, but this sets up the Steelers very well in this AFC North race. You're a game and a half up. Both of these teams have tough schedules, so it's not like the Ravens get to go glide through, a bad schedule the rest of the way. Are the Steelers the clear favorite to you now after this game?
They have to be, right? I mean, they absolutely have to be. The Ravens have just as tough of a schedule. Now, if the Steelers, I think the key to them winning, maybe the AFC North, but the key to them having a shot at the 1 seed here, first of all, Buffalo's going to need to win this game today, I think, is to come back on Thursday and win that game. You come back then suddenly you're 9-2 with a long prep time for Joe Burrow and the Bengals, and then you get Cleveland at home. So I think at worst, you're going to be 10-3, but there's a chance that you could be 11-2 going into Philly. And that would be a very good place to be because you want to maybe split with Philly and Baltimore. But they're in a great place, especially if they can do this quick turnaround and beat the Browns, which you'd think they could, but strange things happen on Thursday nights in Cleveland. Jacoby Brissett turns into Dan Marino. Myles Garrett attacks people with their own helmets. Those games have not gone well for the Steelers Thursday nights in Cleveland.
Yeah, and I think that's the big concern is, they're not a great team. But I think Jameis Winston, I saw in that bottom line, I was not super paying attention to that game. He had thrown for like 350 yards with a decent amount of time left. Let me see if I can pull that score up here real quick. They end up losing 35-14, but Jameis Winston passed for 395 yards, 2 touchdowns. So he's not going to be, I think, necessarily easy to deal with, Joe, in a short week.
Well, that remains to be seen. He's sort of up and down. How many interceptions? Any?
None. 0.
Okay. Well, but he was playing the Saints. So
That's
I don't know. If you ask me every quarterback the rest of the season, which one I'd love to play 100 times, it would be Jameis Winston compared to the other guys they're playing. But you're right. On a given day, he could beat you because he can explode on people. That's for sure. But I feel pretty good about the Steelers. It looks like the Browns have quit to me. Looks like the best bet for them is to sink to the bottom of the league. The Browns is the Browns. Is that how the saying goes, Adam?
I believe that is the iconic line. So we'll leave it there, Joe. Thank you for joining me. Let you get out of here to write. Everyone else, just a reminder to subscribe to the channel if you're joining us for the first time. We do these after every Steelers post-game show. We're going to have more from the stadium coming. Jerry Dulac and Ray Fittipaldo will give their reactions here an hour or two after the game. We'll also have the North Shore Drive Monday, Wednesday, and Friday this week. Chip Hammond Football with Brian Backel on Tuesday. And, of course, we mentioned Paul Zeiss's daily live stream. So lots more coming your way. Subscribe, like the video if you enjoyed it. Help us out in the YouTube algorithm. We always appreciate that. And we will talk to you again next week.
See you.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.